All right, everybody. Hello, hello, hello. Everybody take your seats. We're starting another session. Now, you all know that Bubble is no code. But what you might not know is that there are coders behind the scene coding everything that you do. And this session is going to be an incredible opportunity with an incredible engineer. And you're going to have the opportunity to get behind the scenes and ask him anything that you want. Any questions, any dirty laundry, Alessandro is here to answer them for you. Now, a little bit of logistics before we get started. There's two people right here and right here who have microphones. So when you ask a question, raise your hand. Alessandro will pick on you, and then someone will come bring you a microphone and then speak your question into the microphone. All right, are you guys ready? Yeah. Woo! Let's ask Alice any questions that we want. Please welcome the man, the myth, the legend, Alessandro Jeanteur.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Hi, everyone. Hope you're doing good. Presentations were pretty awesome, so I'm super excited for what we're going to do. First question here, I'm assuming a lot of people here are very technical, but I wanted to get a show of hands on a scale of 1 to 5, basically how much you feel comfortable and are confident in your abilities with the Bubble editor and the language and everything. So 1, 2, 3, okay, a lot of confident people. 4, 5, yeah. Okay, yeah, I'm trying to gauge basically the level of basically nerding out that I'll be doing here. I'm going to try to stick to pretty short answers, but if anything comes up, if you don't understand anything, ask me and I'll do some follow-ups. But basically, we'll get it started. Is there anyone that has a question that they want to ask? Here, I think you raised first.
Yeah, hi. So I have a question that's been asked quite a lot. Is it when are the EU servers or hosting in EU coming out, and what's blocking it? To a bit more detail.
So there's two pieces to this. I cannot commit to any timelines. Obviously, this is not a cheat code. But aside from that, I can talk just briefly about a lot of the difficulty in getting that live. Essentially, we have a very complex cloud at the moment that is handled in a very custom way that has given us a lot of advantages and disadvantages in the past. We call that abstraction internally Bubblebot, but it's an ensemble of a lot of servers, processes, and tools that we have to deploy stuff. Currently, it is extremely attached to the concept of a single cloud, a single AWS account, a single set of servers, essentially. And the main thing that we need in order to decouple and to have a full compliant EU server is going to be the ability to spin up a new, complete copy of this. The problem is that this set of tools really, really wants to be the only one in the room doing any changes. So there's a lot of background checks that will tear down servers if we spin them in the wrong place. And because of that, we have to completely re-architect the way in which we do our deployment pipelines, our processes to provision servers, and to create new ones. So essentially, all of that stuff is kind of a prerequisite. Because of that, we are totally working on this, but it's not going to be an easy thing. There's a lot of roadblocks on the way. And the cherry on top, if you will be the ability to spin up a cloud in any region, Europe being the most requested one, but any region. And so we'll be really happy when we can get to that being easy, but for now it's kind of blocked on a lot of extra, basically code debt removal, essentially. So that's basically it. I think you are next, and then we'll get that one.
How many questions can we have? So, two quick ones. Are y'all working on making the page change faster so we don't have to build so much inside a single page to kind of get that single page app functionality?
So I'll answer this one really quickly. Okay. We have a lot of tools that are in the work. Some of them quickly easy to release, some of them much farther along. Some of the difficulty there is basically in the ecosystem around this. Essentially, the question around here is because we have a lot of like load time cruft and things that need to load before a page is functional, we have a lot of people try to design a single page instead of multiple pages, because that way usually a lot of stuff works faster, but it's harder to maintain. And so the compromise is between making multi-pages apps go faster as opposed to like having a single page that becomes so big that it's unwieldy. And we're trying to basically get the best of both worlds by having some internal navigation work much faster. The main blocker there is basically plugins. Essentially, we have historically given plugins a little too much power, quote unquote. And so a lot of the process to removing this bottleneck would involve a large breaking change for anyone who has any plugin on their page that they expect to be loaded once per page load. And a lot of the abstractions there depend on the kind of plugin. So there's a lot of ambiguity about what a plugin actually is, what it should have access to. For instance, if you're just doing an element, you want it to load as late as possible with no blocking resources so that it cannot slow you down, like if it's doing some charts or whatever. But if it's doing analytics, you actually want it to load first and foremost. So this type of change to loading plugins as part of page load completely changes whenever we become able to do soft reloads and soft page changes. So we're working on that. It's pretty hard. There's a lot of like unexpected things that came up, but we'll report on some progress. And in the meantime, the other thing that we're doing to make page load much faster is a lot of data side changes and modularization of the code that we write so that we can load smaller and smaller packages, which should accomplish a lot of the same features, just in a different way.
And,
I'll let you do
just one more.
One. Yeah.
Are we getting anywhere closer to being able to define what fields are returned when you do a search?
Sorry, can you, since I can't hear
Are we getting any closer to be able to define what fields from a data type are returned when you do a search on the front end?
What fields of a data type are returned
For
when you do...
instance, a user,
yes.
like first name and email.
Exactly. So we call that internally, we give that feature a name. We call it like basically partial row fetching. And this partial row fetching is somewhat in the works, but we're still in the early shaping phases. The main difficulty there is because we want to abstract a lot of the caching abstractions to make your page fast. There's a lot of places where our current cache layers assume the integrity of a thing. And so building the extra logic to only fetch a few fields would make it very hard to just do that naively, because then you would break caches that don't really know anymore whether you have the full thing or you have the 2 fields that you wanted, or the privacy rules show you only 2 fields but actually have more. So there's a lot of complexity there. We're really trying to make that happen at some point. So it's the kind of thing that we're really working on. I'm sorry, I'll talk a little less loudly. Oh, sorry. Oh, you went first, I think. I wasn't sure, so. Who was first? Oh, you are? Okay. Yeah.
Hi. Do you have any expectations of releasing database views like we have on like regular MySQL?
It depends on what you mean.
Creating views, for example, with the kind of what he asked, to deliver only specific fields or to do some data treatment in the server to create that view, cross tables, and creating a view.
So basically what you mean is having a way to define derived types that only have some fields that are computed and some fields that are generated?
Yeah, because we have the data types.
Yes.
As tables, and usually on MySQL, for example, we can create views, database views, which are not physical tables. They are just a way to view data
through some lens.
Treated way. Currently, we build physical views we call the satellite databases, but
So this is an interesting question. Honestly, we haven't thought about this as the main approach to doing this type of storage. Maybe like the difficulty here is in like designing the abstraction so that someone who's maybe slightly less technical would want to have in order to make this fast. So this adds like an extra layer of complexity that potentially we would want to abstract away from users. So just to give you an example, if you wanted a view that represents maybe the full name and the short version of the bio for a profile, based on the original user data type that has those fields kind of full and compiled out, we might think of a similar approach to doing this, which would be to always compute this on the fly in the form of expressions and having shortcuts for those expressions and making sure that those always compile to some very fast queries. This is basically going to allow us to also store the data in a different way. So longer term, we might steer away from the current database logic and hardware that we're using, and instead compiling all the expressions that require data to giving us some underlying storage format that we can query much more easily, which will almost be as if we were under the hood creating like views for every single search. We might not get to that point, but we'll probably move in that direction without necessarily giving that as an abstraction to users, unless it turns out that everyone has been waiting for this. Does that answer? I think you had raised your hand first, and then you. Thanks.
Hi. So I have a question about returning data from backend workflows to the front end.
Yes.
This has been a subject taken up multiple times. Where are you on this timeline, and what are your thoughts about this?
So again, I cannot speak about timelines because there's a lot of intersecting priorities and ways in which this could work. But this is a very commonly asked feature. One of the weird reasons under which we might not build such a feature is when there's already a very janky but fully functional way to do this. In this case, you can actually wire stuff up with an API connector call to yourself that returns this data. So even though it is very janky and we don't want to recommend that to users, we know that users are smart and have figured out the ways around this. So it is not as blocking for most people. We would really like to think through the design patterns in order to get to a place where you can do that. So typically, I would call this feature synchronous backend workflows. So essentially, instead of scheduling a backend workflow, you basically trigger it right away and wait for the response. So that's definitely something that can go on the idea board, and I'm pretty sure it already is there somewhere. But we'll think about what it means for the design of the language to introduce such a feature. One of the weird ways in which these features that sound like no-brainers can be actually pretty hard to integrate into the broader language is when they introduce some desire for bad patterns across apps. And so one of the ways in which such a feature could actually backfire tremendously would be if people started using this for every page, and you would start losing a lot of the security aspects of individual pages, where the granularity of individual pages allows you to define permissions, redirects, and everything. And if most people start moving most of the logic to backend workflows, we lose out on a little bit of this security by default that we are currently introducing. So it's something to work on, but there's a lot of that required. I think you were first. If you want, Mike.
I had two questions. One is super quick. You know, the fit to width and fit to height. Why is it like technically hard to enable them by default type of thing? Because I've heard that there is something that is preventing.
So a lot of the responsive and layout stuff, I think, has a lot of opinions about what to do as the default, what should be the default. I believe there have been a lot of arguments in both directions for draggability, discoverability, and everything. I honestly have been much less involved with the front end recently, so a lot of the decisions around this predate me. But essentially, it's not that it's difficult, it's that when you have a language that is open to the world, all of these spec changes become a little bit of a trade-off. and introducing new options to basically say, hey, you have like editor preferences, and you can say, my preference is for this to always be fit to width or whatever. Those things could come up, but they also introduce complexity of their own, and they need their own framework and design and spec. So I'm pretty sure that we'll get around to this as well, but it hasn't been prioritized.
And the second question, we've talked a lot today about kind of the editor improvements and everything.
Yes.
And it feels like the kind of plugin side of things hasn't been developed
Yes,
much.
yeah.
Are there any plans? I know you can't talk timelines,
Yeah.
but like, are there any plans to improve it?
I mean, I'm pretty sure that like we all know that the plugin editor is a little bit behind on a lot of things, and the APIs for the plugin editor are not as good as we want them to be. I'm not sure if we're going to make this the priority focus, because at the end of the day, we're like still pretty focused and smaller team. So we would love to actually put like a whole team and resources to this. It's just not going to be the first thing that we do, because when we ask a lot of people whether they would want like 10 times faster data stuff or this, usually even the people that really want the plugin stuff would be like, okay, if we have more users using Bubble because they really love the product, then maybe there's a better business case for building more plugins, and they would still prefer having the product be better. So this is the reason why we are not prioritizing this at the moment. A lot of the actual broken stuff might still get fixed for sure, because we are still trying to maintain functionality. But there's a lot of other areas in which plugins and the ecosystem might be developed in the future, and that may go beyond the plugin editor as a concept. So there's a lot of things that are, at least in the early phases of like design and concept. So it will happen, just not the first thing that we do.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think you were next, and if I missed someone else, please reach out. Okay. I think you are.
Hi, Alessandro.
Hi.
You have this, it's not a bug, it's like this very particular thing in the privacy rules tab where when you want to set up a privacy rule where you have like a pretty nested field
Yes.
On a certain data type, like 3 layers deep, you have the X, Y, Z
Yes.
restriction. One, could you tell me like why that is technically? And
Yes.
two, are you be able to fix it?
Absolutely. So as for fixing it, yes, but it comes after a lot of the revamp that we're currently doing on the data frame. So a lot of the data storage that we have is basically, for various reasons, is very inefficient. It was built quickly without much thought to like the 10 different layers of scalability that would be required, and that we have basically gotten to almost a tipping point on. We still have a lot of bandwidth, but it will be the next bottleneck that prevents us from growing and from our apps from growing more. So we're basically readdressing a lot of the ways in which queries are made, and that is going to potentially enable a lot of stuff, including what we internally call joins. So it's a very common pattern where you have a query that has a thing that you're searching for, and then you want to get a nested field. So you want a foreign key, and you want to get stuff on that foreign field. This is what we have in the privacy rules potentially. The main problem there is without joins as a capability, doing any of that is arbitrarily complex. So if you have 1 million users, and each of those million users have a best friend, then getting the best friend's first name will be kind of like a very, very slow and inefficient process where you have to download the first table and then go fetch everyone else. Doing this join is not the hardest feature to implement, but a lot of considerations have to be taken into account for typically cacheability of the results, the scalability of repeats, foreign keys, and a lot of stuff around that. So we're currently working on making it easy to do that feature. And as soon as we have that, we'll be really happy to basically release a lot of the floodgates on unscalable queries that we have prevented from happening.
All right, thanks.
Thanks. I think you were next.
Hey, Alessandro, thank you for taking the question. My name is Beck, and mine's pretty simple. Is there any way, or do you guys have plans of when I push live,
Yes.
it doesn't disrupt the current users? Ideally, maybe at page refresh or when they navigate away, but in my application, at least, a lot of it is user-generated content, recordings, audio-related stuff, and if I push
Yes.
live, Obviously, it will break it.
So there's multiple pieces to this. The first one is, why do we require this banner for the page refresh? Again, this has to do with like the bubble being a language part, where it could very well be an option for users to basically say, accept data integrity problems, which is, it sounds horrible, accept data integrity problems, but let people stay on the old version. And then basically ensuring data integrity and basically maintaining this thing. In order to make a lot of the mobile stuff work, a lot of this work is being undertaken. So we are going to see where it lands exactly for the mobile part, and then see how much of this we can replicate on the web, where usually a refresh is actually cheaper. But depending on that, we might land on a solution where a lot of the stuff, even potentially read-only, in some limited way, would not require this refresh banner. For a lot of other reasons, I'm not sure if this is the part of their questions that was more pressing, is like, we also have a few issues where very large apps, when they deploy, they might actually cause a little bit of latency for everyone for a few minutes. And this is another thing that we are currently working on, which is basically pre-warming up the version that is being built before we push the live button and we switch over the traffic. This is a much more technical problem, a much less philosophical one. It's the infrastructure that we have in order to build the metadata that is necessary to load an app is currently built out on the fly, and it's a big problem for a lot of reasons, including this one. So we're also working on lifting that. Who is next, actually? I think it might have been you, but I'm not sure.
I've got a sort of a philosophical question for you.
Go for it.
A minute ago, you said Bubble's a language, and we've heard Bubble is programming.
Yes.
I'm curious, when you think, I guess specifically about expressions, but it applies to all of Bubble.
Yep.
How much of the expressions are you trying to kind of push the illusion that the expressions are English versus I'm coming to believe more and more that expressions are code. You know, you think about assembly versus machine code. Assembly was more Englishy than ones and zeros, but it's still code, and JavaScript is code. And the more I play with expressions, I realize expressions are code too. Is there anything that's holding you back from doing things like turning expressions into multi-line with indentation and nesting and collapsing and all that the way code does? Or are you afraid of making it look too much like code?
So this is a very good question. I'm generally, like, as an engineer myself, I might not be the best person to answer this, but a lot of the design patterns that Emmanuel here and Josh basically told us from the start were that basically there's a lot of the barrier to code that is purely mental, and that's in the fear of actual lines of code, the fear of the terminal, and the fear of all those concepts. And it's been baked in, and it's very hard to unwind, but a lot of the ways in which you can mitigate that is by not using the same words and phrases that are very formal, and by using different semantics that are less load-bearing. So this is maybe why you see that we use yes and no and their respective language translations, but not true and false, which everyone in programming would be like, but why? And so it's like one of those tiny barriers that I think at some point we might release a way for people to unpack that and to basically just use a lot of Bubble's power for like organizing stuff, but still writing expressions as some form of syntax for code. But there's a lot of like implications, both for design, both for the actual language specifications and what they do, what they don't do, where having our own language helps a lot. Because potentially one might say like, if you use true and false, what happens if it's neither? And JavaScript might say it's null, or someone else might say it's something else. And by having our own syntax, we can say, we decide that it means false. Like, we basically only have Booleans right now. There is no null. It's one or the other. And so we might work on that, but it's like a very, very large like design undertaking. And it's probably going to come as like a phase 2 after we are happy with the editor. So I think you came next. Let's see. Yeah. I think you were here. Yeah, I didn't catch your name. Oh, sorry. I think it was on the left. Yeah. Sorry. No problem.
Yeah. Are there any plans to make logs more like detailed, reliable, and potentially integrate with like third parties like during the revamp?
What do you mean by blocks?
Logs, like backend logs.
Sorry, logs. Sorry,
Logs,
okay,
yeah.
sorry, I couldn't make your question. Yes, absolutely. The question about reliability is kind of paramount there. There's a lot of like considerations about what it means. The current state is very simple. Logs only happen when something happens on the back end. So a lot of people perceive that as unreliability when there's a click and the click does some action, conditions, whatever, and then the condition evaluates to false, so we don't run anything. Therefore, it's not run on the server, potentially, right? This kind of thing has to be balanced against potentially there's going to be a lot of scaling constraints because people that have some animation that runs in the background every second or so, and that has 1 million users, we don't want that to potentially generate billions of logs every day. So there's going to be like a balance, some trade-offs, and in the same way, we're going to probably try to work on the UI in order to make the logs more visible, more like at the forefront of the general debugging experience. I think Flusk's tool is extremely powerful in that vein, and we are probably going to see how we make the core experience match a little bit of those expectations a little more. So I think there was someone at the back. Yeah, thanks.
Hey, sir. Just wanted to know what are your plans for the editor, thinking about big platforms. We do have like a quite complex platform, and we need, just for instance, like a 32 gigabytes RAM just to open our editor. The optimization button doesn't work. The issues tracker, it's very hard to use because it's a really big one. So I saw the news coming on the editor side, but it's pretty much about like the design and the front end and about the performance of the editor for my case or this kind of platform.
So this is a great question. The answer is it's less sexy, but we will have to. So we'll basically have to fix a lot of the performance issues, and a lot of it is already in the works. There's a feature flag that you can try out that we have a few like corner cases on correctness that still need to be addressed, but there's a feature flag that's almost ready to be rolled out for everyone that relates to memory issues typically and should reduce the footprint of the editor by like 2-3x. It depends on the app, so that's already pretty big. Then there's a second one that's basically the issue checker itself, which is very unscalable right now for various reasons that we don't have time to get into, but ask me later. Essentially, the issue checker itself is also going to get like a lot of work in order to make it more scalable. Currently, it's so slow on large apps that we cannot add meaningful work to it. So we're going to probably streamline a lot of it in order to make it actually doable to debug your app, even if it's pretty big. So definitely, this is going to happen. It's much less fancy to announce, but don't worry. We're actually working on the back end to do a lot of this. So, yeah. Probably one last question. I think you have had your hand up for a long time.
So I have a plugin on the plugin store, and I was actually reached out by Bubble to ask questions about it, and then sort of found out this morning that streaming.
Streaming?
That streaming is now going to be supported in like the new year, which sort of makes the plugin kind of obsolete anymore. And so it just from a knowing what's coming down the pipe sort of thing would be helpful, just because like I've put a lot of work into it, so it's a little bit of a disappointment kind of thing, because I asked that question, they said no.
Yeah. So this is something that goes way, way beyond my pay grade, so I have a lot of things that I can reply to this. I'm sorry about the plugin itself. I feel like there's going to be, as we mature, there's going to be a lot of plugins that some feature that they provide is really critical to the experience, and we might try to implement them natively for trust reasons, for performance reasons, and a lot of this will have to be done even from a compliance standpoint. In terms of communicating that, I think that the ecosystem work is currently a little bit in flux, and there's a lot of stuff that we have not yet decided on not committing. And so I think even among the team, there is no like full clarity on what things we are planning on killing such plugin in 6 months by redoing it. And some of the things that we think about doing, we might have to have like a deprecation timeline in order to properly announce that to the stakeholders and to the people that might be affected. But that's a very good example, and the streaming plugin, I use it on my app, so I appreciate the work for now. Yeah? Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
For now?
Yeah, for now. Yeah. I think, no, it's going to be something in the next few months. I think we're out of time, so I'll be outside for anything, but thanks a lot for all the questions.